And I am live, it says. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Dale Peterson, and this is the Unsolicited Response Show. Every month we do a live show. This is the April ICS Security Month in Review, and I'll bring my guest on in just a second. But I just wanted to acknowledge and take a deep sigh that S422 is now over. What that means for you, if you're watching this, is the content will get back on schedule. So we'll have our show every Wednesday, my article every Tuesday, Friday news and notes. We kept up most of that during S4, but I would say that maybe the depth of analysis was a little bit lighter, and the depth of reviewing what happened in the week. So we're back to normal now. S4 is done. It was amazing. I love seeing the community. The spirit at the event was really unprecedented. It was just so exciting to see the community come together. What we did, though, is we got a ton of great content for you. So we'll be releasing 2 to 3 of those videos a week. We have a schedule posted, and they will be released from basically now. We started last week all the way through September 15th, and then we'll have all of them out there. So keep a look for those. You'll see those in the Friday news and notes. I'll try not to ping you too much, but a lot of great quality content I think you're going to enjoy. The funny thing is, though, we just finished 22, and because it started 3 months late, we're already working on 23, S4 23. So the sponsor package is out. We're signing up sponsors on May 16th. And probably of more interest to you is the call for presentations will open up on June 15th. So start thinking about your great ideas. We're really looking forward to another great event. I think everyone was energized by the last event. So with that, let's dive in to this week. Liz, can you bring up Daniel? My co-host for this episode, the April ICS Security Month in Review, is Daniel Kapellman Zafra. He is a Senior Technical Analysis Manager at Mandiant. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hello, Dale. Thanks for the invite. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, I can't believe I see you so quickly after S4. You were up on the S4 stage talking about the digital forensics and incident response package for PLCs that the Mandiant team created, and actually going over what it'll do. And that's going to be an open source tool, right? That'll be available to people.
Yeah. So actually, well, first of all, now that you bring up S4, I'm really sad not to be in Miami right now, and I'm already looking forward to the next year. But yeah, so what we were presenting was this Dfir Framework, basically trying to call a bit for more, let's say, some more participation, more interest into generating this type of theoretical frameworks to bring some of the knowledge that is already documented in general security, but bring it up specifically for ICS community. So yeah, this framework is something that anyone can use. It's there's a blog specifically with some details. And also there was a training later that was also from S4. I believe it might also be released in YouTube.
Yes.
That one was from Glenn and Ken on our side and Chris, and basically, yeah, some teamwork to give back some to the community.
And I looked at the schedule. Your session will come out on June 16th. So that's when your video will be out. And the reason some people say, why don't you just dump them all right away? We found that if we do that, they don't get much attention. You know, people just can't handle 60, 70 presentations all at once. By doing it a couple of weeks, yes, there's a bit of a delay, but we also then can highlight each one of them and do a post on them and highlight them in social. And it tends to really make the work stand out more. And we really want to bring attention to quality work. But with that, let's dive in. Now, the reason I asked you to be on the show, you know, I'm always trying to figure out who should I bring on the show for the month. We had this month, April, or the last month of April, was very heavy on, let's say, new malware that was out there. And I know that you had written articles and been involved in the research on both of these. So I thought we'd bring you on board. So we'll be talking about those. And just if you're watching this live on YouTube or LinkedIn, Daniel and I can see your comments. Producer Liz will pop some of them up on the board. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will respond to them. This is a live show. So Daniel, with INCONTROLLER, which is the Mandiant name, or Pipe Dream, which is the Dragos name, We've had presentations on it. There's been a lot of white papers. If we maybe take a step back, what do you think is new and important about this new malware as compared to what we've seen in the past?
Okay, so first of all, even before getting specifically into INCONTROLLER, you mentioned already one very interesting thing, which is the mere fact that we start running into these type of tools again, right? Because the last time we saw something like that was 2017, let's say, like during the Trident times. So we're talking about like a couple years later, and around the same time, we see two very interesting pieces of malware. So besides from the fact that it's a ton of work and it just got us crazy for a couple months, well, it seemed to be very unique. Like when we started looking at it, one of the guys from my team started taking a look, analyzing, and what he said is like, hey, I think this is kind of like more complicated than Trident. And we started having discussions, and it was very interesting because the reason why we consider it more complicated or more, let's say, more concerning in a certain way is not because it required much more, let's say, technical knowledge about how a specific environment works and super in-depth, but exactly the opposite. It seemed to be a lot of code again, but it seems to be a very well organized code. It seems to be fairly usable. Not that anyone can use it, but that someone that has the knowledge to go and utilize this code, they have all the tools in place to go and use it. So I would say that the most concerning is this extensibility, this flexibility of the code of being used, and basically having, let's say, it's almost user friendly. That's how I would say. And that is where its complexity can be seen.
Well, and I noted in my article yesterday a key line from the CISA alert. It said the tools enable them to scan for, compromise, and control affected devices once they have established initial access to the OT network. So the idea of this is an extensible tool that once you get on the system, you then can do a variety of things using basically documented features and functions that lack security in Modbus and in some of the code assist protocols. Now, OPC-UA, if properly configured, you would have to defeat some of the security, but if improperly configured, like a lot of deployments are, you could just get things out of the box. And to me, it seemed like something we thought about when we were doing Project Basecamp, that essentially you get in and then you start looking around for what's there, and then have this whole like Swiss Army knife. That this one had a couple of tools on it, but you could easily see them adding something for Rockwell, adding something for Siemens, adding something, for Emerson. It really looked like a tool that someone who was saying, I'm going to need to get into a lot of different systems. How do I do something so I don't have to write everything over each time?
Yeah. So since you mentioned that about the tool, I think that's one very interesting thing that I mean hasn't been discussed pretty much yet a lot. That is the fact that at this point in time, there is, based on the analysis, based on how the tools look like, based on the components they had, we have this kind of let's say perception that we assume that the tools are meant to be used together in a single target. Probably they already had reconnaissance, they knew what assets they were looking for. But to be honest, because of what you're mentioning, how it's developed with this extensible functionality, it might as well be that, maybe someone came up with the idea of this might be a couple assets that I'm familiar with. So let's start building this malware. Let's see how it works. And maybe afterwards we go and build different ones. So yeah, like you're saying, it's more like having this Swiss Army knife that you can adapt based on the knowledge that you have of a target environment. And I think that's one of the most interesting things.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because again, this is where once you get really technical, you get out of my range. I'm looking at this more at a high level. This one, let's say this one was going after a target that had Omron and some of these Schneider devices that were noted in the various alerts and bulletins and white papers that were put out. If let's say if they wanted to go after a Rockwell device, would the way the architecture is built, is that a separate module, or would that be in, I think, what you were calling code call? Would that just be a more capable version of code call? How were the various capabilities linked together?
Okay, so to explain a bit about the capabilities that it had, let's assume that, for example, you have actually, let's use code call specifically.
Okay.
Code call, the first thing that it does, I'm thinking which one might be the best one to go for this. Okay, no, let's go with Shell. I think that might be the easiest one because it's very clearly segmented. So the first part of Shell uses, for example, the fins, the basically proprietary protocol, specifically to go and find devices. And it tries to go and find the specific run devices that have, based on MAC addresses, specific, it provides a couple of strings, and it tries to determine if it finds the devices that it's looking for. Once it determines that it finds a device that it's looking for, then it deploys HTTP, and then it communicates with the device, and then it starts having the interaction. And yeah, you can start, for example, it can turn on telnet, and then it can start communicating directly with the device, or it can, deploy some of the other, like, more complex functionalities. So that being said, the point in here is that if, for example, in this case, the actor wanted to interact with another device that had a specific, that uses fins, for example, they already have the discovery capability. So now what they would have to change is the second part, where they are specifically targeting HTTP that is only compatible with certain devices. So what's interesting in here is let's say, like, the use of the protocols and how they are incorporating them. And that is what enables them to be able to communicate with more devices. Using the same analogy in code call, they use Modbus in the beginning, and then they use a specific CodeSys-based proprietary protocol from Schneider. So if they want to go and interact with any Modbus device, we know that there is a capability. It is very easy to just bring back up the beginning of that module, and then design something separate that targets a specific device that, there, of course, there has to be more development. But that reuse of protocols, I think, is what makes it the most interesting. It's also, a bit of the structure of the code, right? But in general, it's this this use of protocol instead of like a specific asset that makes it easy to go and deploy. And it's very similar when you talk about in Destroyer, where, if you remember, what they did was develop communication with a specific set of protocols, and then based on that, they start dropping different capabilities to each of them. I don't know if that helps or not.
It does a little bit. I guess what I was wondering is if there was some, like, basic module that then there were these add-ons to it, so that you would say, I want to do enumeration, and I've got two modules to enumerate, and then I could add a third one, or I want to turn things off, and then, but it sounds, based on what you're saying, is it would be more if they were going to do a Rockwell one, they would create a new Rockshell module, or whatever you guys decide to name it.
Yeah, that might be an option, but I think how you mention it is also like, it's also accurate. Like, there are many alternatives to expand it. Yeah, what you mentioned about module is basically what they say about modular coding, which is precisely like, let's assume that you have certain functionalities and you can add an additional functionality to what is already in there. That's another option. There are many different ways to scale code. So yeah, it would be up for the attacker. What makes it easy is, this modularity, how you say, or extensibility, which is actually, I wasn't also entirely familiar with that as a concept. But when we get, for example, when you get a piece of malware like this one, the first thing we do is we go with all the different experts we have around the company. And for this one particularly, we go with one of our malware analysts. Actually, he's also in the blog. His name is Raymond. So also, like cheers to him. And basically, he starts looking at this malware, and besides from talking with us and describing everything he sees, he was the one that introduced that first, about like, hey, this seems extensible. This seems that it has different modules. This seems that it can be expanded in certain ways. And then based on that, we started actually researching, okay, well, this is actually what it means. And so that's also one very interesting thing that we're bringing to discussion, but wasn't probably discussed before, because it required some of this multidisciplinary knowledge as well.
Yeah, quite honestly, it is the kind of thing that I assume the U.S. government has. I assume that any government that's serious about having an attack capability on a variety of ICS, it would be the natural thing. You would have access tools. And then once you have access, you'd have this, as I said, this Swiss Army knife of saying, if we run into this system, we have this module. If we run into this system, we have this module. It's just, we haven't seen one before. So that was quite novel. Another thing that Rob Lee highlighted, and I also saw it once I, looked for it in the Mandiant thing, was this concept of PLC Proxy. To me, that was very interesting, where you could actually, and again, we envisioned this with Rockwell because we did more work on the Logix line, but someone gets into a PLC and then goes from that PLC to the other connected PLCs, actually looking to see who does this PLC talk to. I think this was in the Schneider module and the CodeCon module that you called. Dragos called it Evil Scholar, where you get into the PLC and you find out who it's talking to, and then you use that to branch out to communicate and do things to other PLCs. That was pretty new. I hadn't seen that actually in code before.
It's definitely, it's definitely something very, very interesting. Also because it shows, and that's another kind of like, let's say, implication that we saw, that it was like the intentionality of not only dropping, like, I mean, if you go like many years ago, when you think of something like Stuxnet, when it's more like you deploy it, I mean, the difficulty is deploying. Once it's deployed, it goes, and it mainly is going to fulfill a purpose. But in this case, it's very clear that there's an actor that is going to be defining what it does. And it also sort of echoes to me what we saw in Triton. One of the things that we're pushing a lot into, that was the idea that, there's an attacker that most likely is going to try to have some method of control over the malware so that they can go and adapt to what's happening in the environment.
There's one other thing I want to talk about, but is there anything else that really caught your attention in Controller that you think maybe hasn't been picked up by the community as much as you'd like? Or did we get it all?
No, I mean, that's a good question. No, I think like my main biggest question is the one that I was mentioning about, like, the assumption that we think that they're going to be used together, but they could be used separately. And that particularly, actually, you can see it. There's a diagram in our blog. I think actually other groups also picked up from our diagram, that we sat down, like 3 or 4 of us, we were discussing, trying to come up, like, is this how it's going to happen? And then try to make sure that we could show it, like, in the Purdue model, how it's going to look at different levels. So that's one of the things that seems very interesting. And kind of tied to that is the actual 2 additional Windows components. Well, we say Windows, but basically like non-ICS components.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones, I mean, there's not. I mean, we haven't analyzed so much because there's not, like, it's not very clear whereas it's ICS or not or whatever. It's kind of like it might be related. It's most likely related, but I think like analyzing the problem of INCONTROLLER not only as what's going to happen immediately, like in the controllers, but actually the process that the actor should follow to get there. I think that is also something interesting. I know that probably that goes out of our scope on OT, but it's still interesting to keep in mind.
It just reminding people, we'll take your questions or comments in the chat. If you've ever listened to the Bill Simmons podcast, he's an American sports guy. He has this character he calls Conspiracy Bill, that whenever he's going to talk about conspiracy, so maybe this is Conspiracy Dale. I need a special hat for that, tinfoil hat or something. But the other thing that I found unusual about this is just the way it's being handled. And it even, this talk about whether it was employed or deployed or something. Rob addressed this in his keynote on the second day of S4. He was very careful. He said, it has not been employed. And even in I didn't really see Mandiant touch this at all, but Dragos said with high confidence it had not been employed. But then he also said it had been deployed. And the only way I could really, I guess, analyze that was the sense that it was found somewhere, but it hadn't been actually triggered to do anything bad, that it had been deployed but not triggered. But then it was really weird to me how you could have high confidence it had not been employed unless you had visibility across every system in the world. So I don't expect you to get in trouble here with Mandiant, and don't say anything that'll get you in trouble. But I will just say, from my standpoint, that was very strange. That it's like, how can we be so confident it hasn't been used? And then the other thing related to that is, how come we're not seeing things like Yara rules to actually let people identify if it's been used? Like, that would be one good way to know if it's been used, is to put out a Yara rule so people could search. I saw that you had one out, or Mandiant had one out for the AS Rock driver, but not for any of these modules that you would typically see. I mean, typically, once malware is found, these IOCs and Yara rules and such go out so that everyone can search to make sure it's not on their system. But most of the searching today is really based on the capabilities of the modules, not the modules themselves. So it all just seems a little strange to me.
Well,
what's
to a
going
certain
on.
degree, well, it is strange, but to a certain degree, one of the things that we wanted to highlight there precisely was what you're mentioning about the detections, right? I think that oftentimes we tend to believe that it's just about finding IOCs that then will be protected. But one of the things we wanted to highlight is precisely, given that this is how we're discussing some malware that you can build upon, that has this modularity, extensibility, and whatnot. And well, what was mentioned, that we don't have a specific case that where it has been deployed, then basically protecting based on indicators might not be the most accurate. Might be a bit misleading. So it seems to us that it would be much more important to highlight that the capability existed, the type of assets, basically try to bring up some attention to what was going on and what type of organizations might be at risk immediately, knowing that with such extensible code, it can continue to be modified. So yeah, partly is that idea of not making everyone feel like, yes, we have the indicators, now we're perfect, but rather we actually have to care about like what is being put out in there, but be aware that this might be evolving, let's say.
But wouldn't that be true of any malware? I mean, what is different about this one than anything else? You could make that same argument with any solution. So that would say, well, we shouldn't bother with these IOCs and Yara rules because it could be changed, and the only way to really do it is to look for the behavior. It just is the inconsistency is what gets me. And again, you're with Mandy, and I didn't invite you to grill you on this, so feel free. This is just what I'm looking at with the event.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty fair questioning, and I'm just going to bring back then like an analogy to a Trident case, for example, where you actually see deployment. And the point is that, since we were mentioning most often identifying a tool like this is not so much about the tool itself, but about how the actor goes and deploys. So since if there is no specific deployment, basically the easiest way for detection is going to be through the footprints that the actor leaves through the process to actually deploy the tool. Basically, if the tool is already deployed, there's already like a high level of access. So if you have a specific case, like where you have full indicators about how it's deployed, how it's employed, and whatnot, then I think that's when there would be a bit more sharing, so that there could be some looking for these footprints. Otherwise, yeah, it was a bit tricky. And yeah, well, basically.
Okay. And just to be clear, and if you don't know the answer to this, again, don't get in trouble, but has Mandiant, so Dragos has said it has not been employed, but Rob said on stage it has been deployed. Has Mandiant made any comment on whether this has been deployed yet, like found at outside of the creator's environment?
We have no indications. We have no evidence that points towards the malware already being used. That being said, we already have like detection in place and whatnot as well. Actually, yeah, we have shared with partners and different organizations and whatnot. And basically, yeah, if anyone finds any, please let us know, and we'll be super glad to go and take a look and go much more in depth. But gladly, this was something that was found before being deployed, at least to I'm going to say everybody's knowledge at the point. So yeah, that's something pretty positive.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Let's go on to our second story, another one. And again, when I looked at what some of the leaders had written on this. I looked at the Mandiant white paper. I looked at some things, Dragos, Nozomi. Actually, ESET found this was Indestroyer 2, which was really initially handled by CERT UA and ESET. And they've just gotten plaudits. Everyone has been saying what a great job they did, including, I think I saw it at the bottom of the Mandiant one. So really, we should give them credit. And I believe that Rob Lipovsky's S4 session will be coming out tomorrow, assuming we finish processing the video. So people should be able to see the technical details on that. And there are samples of this available in Yara rules, and I think NetResec actually blew it up in a little sandbox and captured PCAP. So there's a lot of information about this.
Let me start. Actually, if I can just like drop a comment in there based on what you're saying. I think particularly this case of Indestroyer, and it might be going in a different direction, but it's something that I'm really loving. Okay. What I really think that was super valuable in here is to see the type of collaboration between organizations, between government, between whatnot. Where you see, for example, definitely the work from ESET and CERT UA was amazing. They already put up something. It's super interesting. We started collaborating with them and say like, hey, we want to do an additional analysis. How would this work? Coordinate. Then we put them something. Then NetResec. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah, I don't know how you say that, but yeah.
Basically,
NetResec.
Yeah, right. NetResec. But basically, their analysis is also super amazing because they keep on adding. And then you can see how from each of these blogs you can get a piece of information, a piece of additional information into really understanding what the malware means. I just really love this, and I wish it happened, with every piece of malware, every attack that we see.
Yeah. Mark H., hold on. JCDC is our third story, so we'll get to that one. So let's go to Indestroyer then. Indestroyer 2. Again, the basic question, what did you find interesting or new or important in the analysis of this as compared to what we've seen before?
Okay. So the thing that we consider the most like our main learning, and something that I actually kind of put a bit in the blog, is the fact that everything about Indestroyer already came it was public a couple years ago. We thought that if a tool, an OT tool, is used, it's burnt. No one's ever gonna use it again. It's made for a very specific environment, very specific case, whatnot. And then the fact that we saw a portion of that tool being reutilized, that was really interesting, because well, first of all, I'm glad that it was discovered. Probably partly it is because of that great job that happened before with Indestroyer. But also it is very interesting to see how an actor can actually develop this type of tool that can be reutilized specifically for OT. And this same capability of being reutilized is kind of like what we saw in INCONTROLLER. The fact that based on how they are designed, the fact that they go for a specific, let's say that they focus more on the protocol that is being used. They focus probably on a couple devices, but not, let's say, not on one specific target or one environment, but rather on other capabilities, so that they can go and redeploy in different environments. I think that was what we found the most interesting, because most of the code actually was very similar to what happened in the past in Indestroyer. It was just actually one of the modules that was separated, then was utilized with minor modifications. And actually, some of our Yara rules, again, now calling to another of my guys, Ken Proska, for example, one of his Yara rules for Indestroyer, he was like, hey, this would have detected it. It's like, it's exactly very similar. Like there's no additional obfuscation, at least for this type of detection. So that was something we were really happy about, to realize that there is value in documenting this and in following this type of malware.
Yeah, I noticed that. I had actually that quote from your bulletin. Some Indestroyer detections identified version 2, or would have identified version 2. Is that just because the developers were lazy and lazy, that's a judgment. They didn't care that might happen. They weren't worried that might happen. If they had said, we want to use a lot of the functionality, but evade these detections, is that difficult to do for an attacker?
Yeah, actually, so we also discussed that and include a slide piece in the blog that I mean, like we mentioned, like we were wondering if it was kind of like being a bit sloppy, or if it was on purpose, or maybe, So our theories might be on two routes. One of them is basically that the malware is already burned, so they don't really lose that much, and they need to deploy something quickly. So you redeploy, make a couple small modifications, and then it's super quick. And if it hits, it hits. If not, well, I mean, it was easy, and you don't risk showing additional capabilities that you might have developed, or wasting time in developing new capabilities. The other option is, that simply it was thought that it was just going to work because it worked once, and then there wasn't a lot of work in the extra obfuscation or whatever. Because specifically, one of the things that was interesting with Destroyer version 2 versus version 1 is that after it's deployed, some of the messages that come back in the command line of the output, it does seem a bit obfuscated. It changes a bit. It's not so clear. It starts throwing some gibberish. But the rest of the strings that, when it's being run, and like the malware, they were kept the same as in Destroyer. So there was at least some effort in obfuscating, but not enough to like comparable to the quality of the work that we have seen, or to the complexity of the work that we have seen.
Yeah, and Blake had asked, why did Destroyer 2 lose ICS functionality compared to the original Destroyer freezer burn after 5+ years unused? So I think you answered that. It was more of a choice than let's say the code going bad. They just chose to only use parts of it because they only needed parts of it.
Most
Is
likely.
that
I
right?
mean,
Yeah.
that would be our guess. It's basically just use what you need. No reason to go and deploy everything, because there's another thing, and it's about how you can customize, which was something that we also highlight in here. That is very interesting. Most likely, by making it more simple, they can also focus on other things that they care the most about. So in this case, for example, when they deploy the malware, there's a lot of customizations that they can do. For example, like specific IP addresses that they want to go and reach out. And that's basically something that you can implement much easier if you have like more simple code specifically for the functionality that you need.
Yeah, I think that the main thing I took from this was, from Destroyer 2, was the targeted nature of it. So you hit on that. I mean, it was using the IEC 104 protocol, which is used for power systems monitoring and control. And they actually had, in different versions that were found, they had different IP addresses. They were actually going out and making changes to specific addresses, points, that were, I guess, having the ability to turn off relays, power line switches, things like that. So they would know the environment that they wanted to attack very well. They would say, okay, this PLC on this address has control over this type of functionality, physical functionality of relays and such. I'm almost wondering if they knew the environment so well that they knew they weren't going to be detected. So they said, hey, we know everything about that. They're not monitoring the network. They're not going to see us. So just do it, and don't bother with a new version, because we know that whole system.
Might be the case. Yeah. As you say, definitely. I mean, it's most likely they knew that they either had already explored the environment or had enough access to explore at the same time. So yeah, I'm curious if it might be, well, the official version is that it was not successful. We particularly did not have visibility in there, so we just taking that word. Let's say that it's really good that they were able to identify early. But yeah, it's most likely that the actor at least had some visibility for them to at least even try to go and deploy. That means that there was some level of access.
It does show, I guess it's not new, because they were, well, I don't think we saw this with Triton. Triton never got that far to actually change the physical process, right? It kind of blew up. It didn't work before it happened. But we're actually seeing them in an automated way try to make these changes into the system, which isn't brand new. It's been done before, but it's still pretty rare. And now seeing this extrapolated, and then you combine that with INCONTROLLER, that is providing the capability to make changes across Modbus systems and Omron systems and OPC UA systems. The two of them together show a scary new level of attention to actually modifying physical processes, that much more than we had seen, like you said, since 2017. I guess that's one
Actually,
of my takeaways.
to make one, I'm going to make an analogy that I think
Okay.
might probably bring us a bit into why this is also concerning. And it's, if we talked about the case of ransomware in general, and then I mean, like obviously for OT and whatnot, but in general, you had, if you analyze the evolution, let's say 2017 and before, and then the big changes that happened through, let's say 2020, 2019. The big change is that first it was like, yeah, like worm-like malware. It's deployed, it's difficult to control, it's automated, it just goes, it fulfills a purpose, and it's really bad, but there it has a limit. And then what we call post-compromise ransomware, let's say 2019, then you actually have an operator that sits behind there, that looks at the environment, that decides what to deploy, when to deploy it, and that was actually what made the big change. When you get the operator sitting down in there, you actually do not have just like a machine against you, but you actually have a machine and a person or a group of people. And that is really difficult. It's basically, if I'm sitting down here in front of you and, sparring to see who's going to be the one that succeeds either at defending or attacking.
I like that analogy. I'll give you full credit when I steal it, but I think that's a really good analogy. Let's put up Dick Brooks's comment, because I don't know that we're going to actually answer it, but are PLC vendors planning to send SBOMs and vulnerability disclosure reports, SBOM VDR, to customers? Now, neither one of us are PLC vendors, so we can't answer as to what they're going to do. But when you look at these, the value of that is questionable from a risk mitigation standpoint. I think those might be valuable if I was purchasing a PLC, to see how old the code is in that PLC and evaluate how the vendor is keeping it current. But I don't think having that information would help you at all for InDestroyer 2 or INCONTROLLER. Knowing the PLC and its vulnerabilities. Am I missing something there? Would that be valuable to a defender at this point?
I would say not in any of both cases. I mean, just speaking from the good practices and from the security standpoint, that let's try to foresee anything that could happen. I would say that since right now we're talking about like the actor has influence versus something automated, I think from an automated perspective, it sounds pretty efficient to go and try to find vulnerabilities. That being said, it wasn't in any of these cases.
Yeah, you can connect up to a PLC and you can find out who it's connected to. And a lot of the PLCs, you can trigger commands to other PLCs that they communicate with. I mean, that's the function. That's how a lot of this automation works, right? The PLCs talk to each other and end up doing something. So there is that capability that has been not secured to date. But yeah, Richard, I think before procurement and installation, I mean, we saw this with Basecamp. I highlighted this when we looked at the GED20, which to GE's credit has been updated now with the GED20 MX. But back in 2012, they were using a processor from the Apple II computer, not the Mac, but the Apple II. They were using an operating system that had been obsolete for 10 years. If you were buying a PLC there, and you were looking at the D20 and you had the SBOM hardware and software SBOM, you'd say, oh my goodness, this thing is decades obsolete before I buy it, and I'm expecting it to run for 30 years. Maybe I should look somewhere else. Yeah. And again, credit to GE for addressing that now with the D20 MX. But to me, that's where these SBOMs and HBOMs in level 1 make a difference today.
There's a very funny story, entirely unrelated, but I think it's just fun to hear I am not that young, but I was like, when I started, I was already a couple of years even younger. And then, we started working with some of a specific vendor and checking the asset inventories. And a lot of the things that were in there, I was like, what is this? So I started Googling, and it was like, this is as old as it can get. I've never heard it. It was very interesting to get into all of these devices that they have changed names multiple times. I don't know. It's a different world, and it's just been, like a couple decades. So
yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the one area that you could say an SBOM would help would be with the code assist issue in InController, because code assist is in hundreds of PLCs from a wide variety of manufacturers. The list used to be on their site. That was one of the ones that we went after, I think, the year after Basecamp, because it was such a train wreck. And so misunderstood. A lot of people had no idea they were running code assist. So I guess that might be something where an SBOM would tell you, hey, this INCONTROLLER family with modification might be able to do some things against my system. Maybe Rich or Dick, that might be another one that could happen. Okay, let's move on to our third story, and this will address Mark H's comment. The Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which was JCDC, which was created by CISA a few months ago, got a little blowback from the ICS community because there were really no ICS members there. Mandiant was an initial member, but I wouldn't really call Mandiant, strictly speaking, an ICS. You do a variety of things. There were a couple of companies that played in the ICS arena, but not your, not your large manufacturers weren't in there. Not your dedicated security companies weren't in there. But then at S4, when I was interviewing Jen Easterly, she announced that there is now a JCDC ICS, and the initial members for that are Bechtel, Clarity, Dragos, GE, Honeywell, Nozomi, Schneider Electric, SEL, Siemens, and Xylem. So they've actually created this. And the goals are information sharing, plan, exercise, and collaborate, public-private partnership sort of things. Do you have any, this is a little bit, it's not technical, but I guess you are involved in information sharing quite a bit. And you mentioned it with the ESET case. Do you see JCDC ICS being something that will be useful at a technical level, or do you think that's going to be higher, more policy-based level, or too early to say?
Correct. So, I mean, as far as I understand, there are still things in JCDC that are being molded, because the fact is that CISA wants to make sure that it helps the most the community. That being said, two of the things that I know that I'm aware, for example, that are intended to happen are establishing certain communication channels where there's like both private and public organizations. I think, well, the first two things, that's the first one, the communication channels. And the second one is establishing some feedback mechanisms, for example, when a CISA advisory comes out or things like that, right? So given that the point is expanding the visibility and the collaboration, I think it definitely makes sense to have some coordination, because precisely what you mentioned right now with this, one of the things that happens when we saw through actually both cases, because in INCONTROLLER we were working closely with Schneider, is that most often you have a topic in front of you. You definitely can have all different types of expertise, but there's always something else that someone else knows that you don't. And then when you reach out to that second organization and ask a question, and maybe you just need corroboration to be like, are you sure this is the case? Can you please drop additional information? Those very tiny conversations make a huge difference whenever you go out and publish something. So one example that I have particularly is precisely, which goes back to INCONTROLLER and more of the mystery surrounding it, is basically which industry is what was the developed target, assuming that it's going to be used on its own, right? And then from our perspective, we started looking at it, and we saw the servos, and we saw like the type of PLCs. Most of the advertising, most of the public information says manufacturing, so we assumed like it seems like manufacturing. I mean, it's difficult to tell what, because it seems generic, but it's sold for automation, for a lot of like manufacturing environments. But then when we started chatting, for example, with Schneider, they reach out and they are like, to be honest, it makes sense what you're saying. It could be, but we are aware that our set of customers is all over the place. So to say that it's a specific industry might be too much. So that type of assessment, for example, it helps us to instead of reach out and say like manufacturing organizations, go and take care, we reach out and we say, we're sorry, we don't have a specific what type of industry it is, but just take care if you see the assets. So it really changes the message that comes out.
Yeah, I think it's too early to say. Mark H asks, talks about response scenarios in JCDC ICS and who leads and how will differing opinions on this impact the actual response. And I think this is really one of the challenges. I've disagreed with some people just this week online about what the government's role is in terms of response. Quite frankly, the effective responses I've seen have come from people like Mandy and Dragos and others with expertise focused on incident response, not so much government coming in and doing things. So actually, if we look at Colonial Pipeline, one of the problems I think was you had all these government agencies wanting information. And how do you efficiently get information to the government without slowing things down on the response? You're in the middle of this fire trying to deal with it, trying to, do the right thing for your company, your customer, society. And then the government is saying, well, tell us this, we want to do this. Unless they have regulatory authority, it's difficult. I even think Colonial Pipeline said that they were asked who to send things to, and they sent them to the FBI, and then the FBI chose not to share as much as some of the other members wanted. So maybe the JCDC ICS, they haven't said this, but maybe this could be the conduit in which they get information back and forth into the government, and the government decides how to use it. I will say one thing that I worry about with this, or I think one of the challenges, these things are hard. Information sharing does not have a great track record. Information sharing organizations, despite good intentions by all people and, actual belief in the importance, it just doesn't seem to work that much. I think one of the challenges is, are you going to let anyone in JCDC? Like, are all the vendors going to be allowed in JCDC? Are asset owners going to be allowed in JCDC? And then if you allow everyone in without requiring them to do anything, have you just diminished the value of it? I've seen the ones that have been effective actually have people with skin in the game, almost, in the sense that they commit to doing certain things. And if you don't get everyone to commit to be a member, you have to do something, then I wonder about the effectiveness of this. But, I've given you about 8 different ways to go, and you can go in direction 9 or 10. But Daniel, What are you thinking about this?
Yeah, so there are many things. First of all, part of the idea so far of JCDC is that it has to be voluntary, right? Like it depends on each organization. Like, yeah, there's nothing expected right now as per regulation or anything like that as of now. That being said, can it be complicated? Definitely. It has always been complicated. Like, there are countless ways of information sharing, and it's always, like different incentives, different organizations, different. So I think while there are still like this is still work in progress, and there's still like a lot of things to define and how they are working with it and whatnot. I would just like highlight that I would focus on the value that it has to share this type of information. And I mean, like the 2 cases that I was mentioning a second ago, and it just, because they came to my mind right now. But I think like what's most important here is to keep in mind that yeah, I mean, there has to be collaboration. We all have our different incentives, and simply the fact that there is this let's say running process where we are trying to get the different organizations to match for a similar purpose are very important. And in this sense, I highlight that specifically, for example, before ICS, JCDC has already worked in different topics where I know, for example, that there has been collaboration with different organizations, or things like, for example, well, right now I'm in ongoing conflict, but let's say, for example, elections. That brings me entirely away from ICS, but that's very strong collaboration that we have seen between private and public organizations that basically, make a world of difference. It's elections the year before, the term before versus the most recent one, where you saw all this collaboration and all this machinery. It was a significant change. So I would hope to see something similar for ICS. However, yeah, of course, there's more things to define.
It'd be worth watching. I could see it being effective as a connector. So let's say company X, like the INCONTROLLER example. Let's say that I was a company and I was having difficulty getting response from Schneider Electric. And ICS CERT played this role for a long time with vulnerabilities. Sometimes you would get nothing from the vendor. You'd go to ICS CERT. ICS CERT would contact the vendor, and all of a sudden it got pushed up. So maybe I'm someone and I say, I found this thing, it's doing something with Schneider and Omron. I need to connect to those people, but I can't seem to get to the right place. JCDC could be a connector in that case. So I could see that be effective. I think where it's harder is then when they say it goes in and then it gets shared. I mean, we see examples of that. I'm not sure that the sharing mechanism is going to be anything that's going to be helpful. But it's easy for me to say that because these things don't work much more often than they work. So if you were a betting person, you would bet on it not working and then probably win your bet more often than not. It certainly will be something that I think most of the vendors will join because you just want the JCDC halo. That I'm a member, I'm a good part of the community, I'm doing information sharing, I'm participating. The effectiveness, I think, we'll have to see. But it sounds like you're more optimistic about it than I am.
Well, I mean, I definitely see the value. There's a reason why Mandate is joining, and making our best to make this work. But yeah, it's just and like you said, like an optimistic perspective, but making it very clear that right now it's more like there are still things to define, and that's one of the reasons why I don't go specific into we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, because it's work in progress. There's
Right.
a lot of work in there, a lot of negotiations and whatnot.
Okay, well, let's get to the end of the show now. We always end with a win, a fail, and a prediction for the month. Now, you don't have to have all three, but do you have a win, a fail, or a prediction from April, Daniel?
From April, let me see.
Well, if you got one handy, you can go. Otherwise, I can go first, and then you can think about it a little bit. Okay. So my win is pretty obvious. I mean, the community that I saw at S4 was the win. Just the fact that it grew. I wrote down here, spirit, growth, youth, looking more like society. I wrote an article about this last week. It was amazing to see how the community has grown, how supportive. I mean, we all have our disagreements and fights online and such, but it was amazing to see when people got together. They really connected and they were trying to help each other and trying to make progress. So that was definitely my win. My fail, it's not really a fail. It's just it's almost more of a middle ground. So if you look, Rataflow got acquired for an undisclosed amount right now. The initial payment for a majority stake was $45 million, and the best estimates are it might close for 90 to 100 million. Now, there's no way you can call a startup that gets acquired for, let's say, 90 million a failure. I've never built a company worth $90 million. So amazing job by the team at Rataflow and success. And you should celebrate that. But from the market perspective, it really shows that the second and third tier, the interest and value of second and third tier companies in the detection space has really gone down. I mean, it's time to find a partner and get out, or just be prepared to live with being a $5 to $10 million niche vendor for the next 20 years, because they raised $28 million. So to sell half the company or a majority stake for 45 million, that's not really what you're looking for when you do a startup. So again, not a failure. We always use these baseball metaphors. Certainly not a home run, a double or a triple. Probably not even a single, maybe a hit by pitch or a walk. Again, much better than anything I've ever done. I would love to be able to build a $90 million company and make millions of dollars on it. So in that sense, success in the sense of what does it mean for others in this space? It's kind of showing them the game is winding down. So after that filibuster, do you have any wins or fails for the month?
Yeah, I have actually the three. So I'm glad you gave me a couple seconds.
Okay.
So the first one, the win, I think it's going to be a bit obvious. It's basically on the Indestroyer 2 INCONTROLLER that we were discussing. And in there, I think the big win that I see is, first of all, that I feel we saw much more coordination, a very quick response to what was happening. We saw multiple organizations getting involved in the topic. We saw everyone discussing it. It was kind of like, really, it was a couple very intense months of work compared to, like, we're most of the year looking at all the intel, what's going on, but then suddenly these things explode and it takes, a lot of time. But we saw people like really getting involved. We had basically, I was in Mexico traveling and still helping with to work on this, because it was like, I don't want to get away. It's happening right now. And my team was double as crazy, because they were also like sitting down here and actually putting full times, full days, full nights. And I'm pretty sure other teams did the same. And that's something that I really consider a big win.
Okay.
The second one, the fail. Actually, it's going to be more, this is not so much into that topic. I'm actually going to bring it more like at the, I'm connecting S4 and something that's more like from my personal perspective.
Sure.
And it is that I've seen a lot of interest in the INCONTROLLER, InDestroyer, whatever topics, particularly from English-speaking press, particularly from specific regions. I live in Amsterdam. I'm here in Europe, but I'm Mexican, so I follow a couple of different sources, and I still recognize that these topics are not as well covered in different regions, in different areas. And I feel that managing to be able to communicate this to other groups, to other communities, I think that would have a really high value. So yeah, that would be the fail in my sense, something to continue thinking upon in the future. And finally, the prediction. In terms of the prediction, of course, I'm not going to predict that we're going to see another very complex malware coming up in the next month. But we definitely saw an uptick in activity, different related OT activities that, as the conflict began. And if it was for me to predict, I would say that the rest of the year, we should continue to be seeing. Many are small things. It might not be as relevant this one. Hopefully, we don't see another big one like this very soon. But yeah, I expect this year to continue being a bit turbulent, so that we will have amazing information for next year.
Okay. Appreciate those. I think the fail is really a tough one, because we're seeing quite a bit of pickup in Asia in terms of information going out, worthwhile events and such. A lot of times in English language in Asia. Europe has traditionally been a problem, though, in terms of getting information out, just because of the language issue. It's very hard. I think we ended up, when we had an S4 Europe, we held it in Vienna, because there was like, where can you hold an event where it can be held in English? And they're like, well, you really can't hold an English event in Germany. I mean, not that Germans don't speak English, but they want it to be in German, in the French event in France. So it's a little bit harder. I think the language issues are holding us back more than the interest. And I'm not sure how you solve that. But again, you're in Europe. I don't know. Maybe that's a future discussion of how we solve that issue. But I agree with you. That is I think a fail of the industry. My prediction is a little bit based on what I was talking before. I predict that we're going to hear something very interesting about INCONTROLLER and Pipe Dream that hasn't come out yet. Not so much about the technical, but about where this came from, what it is, who's doing it. It just seems the story just doesn't make sense. The level of detail doesn't make sense to me. Again, it could be just me giving into conspiracies, but I think that we haven't really heard the story of this one. So I predict in the next 12 months, we will learn the story of this one.
Maybe we just like to put up the conspiracy first, like make it exciting, and then
possibly. I do a review of my predictions at the end of the year. This might be one that falls flat, but we'll see. With that, I think we'll close the show here. Daniel, if someone wants to reach out to you, I looked. Are you on Twitter? I found you on LinkedIn, but I didn't see you on Twitter. Are you on Twitter?
Yes, it's at Kapellman. Actually, like how it's written in there below, like here.
Just your last name?
Kapellman. Yeah.
Okay, at Kapellman. Okay, Kapellmann. I have to look at that every time I spell it, because I want to put 2 P's in it, but it's 1 P, 2 L's, 2 N's. If I got
everyone does, and I have no idea why. But yeah, most people add 2 P's for some reason.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for everyone who is out there watching live. We will put this will be out on a recording, and it'll be out on the podcast feed in a few hours. So thanks, Daniel.
Thanks to you.
And